A forbidden image from World War II goes public after 80 years, and the reason is disturbing. The envelope arrived at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, on a cold morning in January 2025. Inside, a single photograph, yellowed and creased, with a red stamp across the back. Classified, do not release until 2025. Archivist David Chen held it up to the light, his breath catching. The image showed 50 children, thin and hollow-eyed, standing in rows outside the gates of Dachau concentration camp. American soldiers knelt beside them, smiling. The date printed on the border read May 8, 1945. David had processed thousands of declassified documents, but something about this photograph felt different. The children's faces were haunted, their clothes mismatched and too large. Behind them, the infamous iron gates stood open, a symbol of liberation. Yet the image had been locked away for 80 years. He scanned the accompanying document. It was brief, almost deliberately vague. Orphans of Dachau, photographed upon liberation, resettlement pending. Nothing more. No names, no follow-up records, no explanation for why the photograph had been classified in the first place. David's hands trembled slightly as he placed the photo on the scanner. This wasn't just another piece of history. This was a story that someone had tried very hard to bury. As the digital file saved to his computer, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: faint handwriting on the back of the original photograph, barely legible. He grabbed a magnifying glass and leaned in close. The words were chilling. They must never know. David sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Who must never know? The children? The public? And why had this single image been deemed too dangerous to share for 8 decades? He reached for his phone. This required more than archival protocol. This required investigation. David contacted Dr. Sarah Friedman, a Holocaust historian at Georgetown University who specialized in post-war displacement and orphan resettlement. When he sent her the photograph, her response came within an hour. "Can you come to Washington today? This changes everything." They met in her cluttered office, surrounded by stacks of testimonies and survivor records. Sarah spread the photograph across her desk, her eyes scanning every detail. "I've seen hundreds of liberation photos from Dachau," she said quietly, "but I've never seen this one. And I've never heard of 50 orphan children being photographed there on Liberation Day." David pulled out his laptop. "I started cross-referencing the date with military records. The 3rd Battalion of the 157th Infantry Regiment liberated Dachau on April 29, 1945. But this photo is dated May 8th, more than a week later. Why would they wait to photograph the children?" Sarah's face darkened. Because by May 8th, decisions had already been made about where these children would go. She opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick binder. After the war, thousands of Jewish orphans were placed in displaced persons camps while international agencies tried to locate surviving family members. But some children simply vanished from the records. "Vanished?" David echoed. "No names in the DP camp registries, no transfer documents, no trace in immigration files. For years, genealogists and survivor families have searched for these missing children, but it's like they were erased." She tapped the photograph. This might be the only evidence they ever existed. David felt a chill run down his spine. The handwriting on the back says, "They must never know." What if these children were taken somewhere they weren't supposed to go? Sarah met his eyes. "Then we need to find out where, and we need to find out who authorized it." Sarah made calls to veterans organizations and historical societies across the United States, searching for anyone connected to the 157th Infantry Regiment. Most of the soldiers who liberated Dachau were long dead, but their families often preserved letters, photographs, and personal effects. 3 days later, she received an email from a woman named Patricia Lawson in Portland, Oregon. Her grandfather, Sergeant James Lawson, had been at Dachau during the liberation. He had kept a diary. Patricia agreed to scan the relevant pages. When the file arrived, Sarah and David read it together, their hearts pounding. May 7th, 1945. Orders came down today. 50 kids, all orphans, no families left. Captain says they're going to America. Special program. Hush, hush. We're supposed to keep it quiet. Don't know why. May 8th, 1945. Took the photo this morning. Kids looked scared. Some of them don't even speak English. Captain made us promise not to talk about it. Says it's for their own good. Says they'll have better lives in the States. I hope he's right. May 15th, 1945. The kids are gone. Shipped out in the middle of the night. No paperwork, no official transport logs. Just gone. I asked the captain where they went. He said, "You never saw them. Understood?" I said, "Yes, sir." But I can't stop thinking about those faces. David looked up from the screen, his voice barely a whisper. They were taken illegally. Sarah nodded slowly. This wasn't an official resettlement program. This was something else entirely. Unauthorized. Hidden. 50 children smuggled out of Germany without documentation, without consent, without anyone knowing. But why? David asked. Why would the U.S. military do this? Sarah's expression was grim. That's what we need to find out. Sarah reached out to genealogists specializing in post-war adoptions. Within days, she was connected to a woman named Rebecca Stein, whose entire career had been dedicated to reuniting Holocaust survivors with lost family members. Rebecca had heard rumors for years, whispers among survivor communities about children who had been taken to America immediately after the war, adopted by families who were told the children had no living relatives. But every time I tried to trace these stories, I hit a wall, Rebecca explained over a video call. No adoption records, no immigration files, nothing. Sarah sent her the photograph. Rebecca studied it in silence for a long moment, then looked up, her eyes glistening. "I know one of these children." David leaned forward. "You do?" "Her name is Ruth, or at least that's what she was called after she was adopted. She's in her 80s now, living in Michigan. She spent her whole life believing she had no family, no past before America, but she always felt something was wrong. She remembered fragments, a camp, soldiers, other children. Her adopted parents told her it was trauma, that she should forget." Sarah's voice was gentle. "Can we speak with her?" Rebecca hesitated. "This will destroy her. Everything she thought she knew about her life might be a lie, but it might also give her the truth," David said quietly. Rebecca nodded. "I'll make the call." 2 days later, Ruth agreed to meet them. They met in a quiet cafe in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ruth was a small, elegant woman with silver hair and sharp, thoughtful eyes. She held the photograph in her hands, trembling. "That's me," she whispered, pointing to a girl in the front row, no more than 6 years old. "I remember this. I remember the soldiers. I remember the gates." Sarah sat beside her. "What else do you remember, Ruth?" Ruth closed her eyes. "I remember my mother. Her name was Leah. She held my hand on the train to the camp. She told me to be brave. And then, they took her away. I never saw her again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "After the Americans came, I thought someone would find her. I thought someone would come for me." "What happened instead?" David asked gently. "A soldier gave me chocolate. He said I was going to America, that I would have a new family, a new life. I didn't understand. I didn't speak English. They put me on a plane with other children. When we landed, people were waiting for us. Families. They chose us like puppies at a shelter." Ruth's voice broke. "My new parents were kind. They gave me a new name, a new birthday, a new story. They said my past didn't matter anymore, but I never stopped wondering. I never stopped searching." Sarah reached across the table and took Ruth's hand. "We're going to find out what happened. We're going to find out if anyone looked for you." Ruth looked up, her eyes filled with decades of grief. "Do you think my mother survived?" Sarah didn't have the heart to say what they both knew. Most mothers at Dachau hadn't. But she said, "We'll find out." David requested additional files from the National Archives under the Freedom of Information Act, specifically searching for post-war orphan resettlement programs. What he found was buried deep in the records of the War Department, in a folder labeled Operation Cradle. The documents were sparse but damning. In the spring of 1945, as the full horror of the concentration camps became public, a small group of American military officials and civilian leaders had created an unofficial program to quickly place Jewish orphans with American families. The justification was humanitarian. These children had no one left, and America could give them a future. But the program violated every protocol. No attempts were made to search for surviving relatives. No documentation was filed with international agencies. The children's identities were erased and replaced with new names, new birthdays, new histories. The reason, according to one memo David found, was chilling. Public sentiment remains uncertain regarding the acceptance of Jewish refugees. To avoid political complications and bureaucratic delays, placement will proceed discreetly and without formal channels. In other words, they smuggled children out of Europe to avoid the very real possibility that America wouldn't accept them officially. Sarah read the memo, her hands shaking. They were trying to do the right thing, but they did it the wrong way. They erased these children's identities because they were afraid of American anti-Semitism. David nodded grimly, and in doing so, they made it impossible for surviving family members to ever find them. How many children? Sarah asked. David checked the file. 50, all from Dachau, all placed with families across the United States between May and August 1945. And the photograph? Classified to protect the program. If it became public, it would have exposed what they'd done. Rebecca mobilized her network of genealogists and researchers. With the photograph and the information from Operation Cradle, they began the painstaking process of identifying the other children and tracing what had happened to them. They found records of adoptions across 12 states: California, New York, Illinois, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Oregon, Florida, and Georgia. Most of the children had been given new surnames, new birthplaces, even new birth years. Some had lived full, happy lives, never knowing the truth. Others, like Ruth, had spent decades searching for answers that were deliberately hidden from them. But the most heartbreaking discovery came when Rebecca cross-referenced the names of the children with Holocaust survivor databases. In several cases, family members had survived the war and spent years searching for their lost children. One case stood out. A girl named Miriam, photographed in the second row of the image, had been adopted by a family in Boston and renamed Mary. Her aunt had survived Auschwitz and spent the rest of her life trying to find her niece, placing ads in newspapers, registering with survivor organizations, never giving up hope. Mary had died in 2003, never knowing her aunt had been looking for her. The aunt had died in 2015, never knowing her niece had been alive and well in America. They had been separated by just a few hundred miles and a bureaucratic wall of silence. Sarah read the file with tears streaming down her face. They could have found each other. They could have had a life together. David's voice was thick with emotion. How many others? How many families were torn apart because of this? Rebecca didn't answer. She didn't need to. David and Sarah knew they had to bring the story to light. They contacted major news outlets, and within weeks, the photograph and the details of Operation Cradle were front-page news across the country. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Families came forward, descendants of the children in the photograph, many of whom had never known the truth about their parents' or grandparents' origins. Some were angry, feeling betrayed by the country that had claimed to save them. Others were simply heartbroken, mourning the families they might have known. Ruth appeared on national television holding the photograph. "I'm grateful for the life I had in America," she said, her voice steady. "But I deserved to know who I was. I deserved the chance to know if anyone was looking for me." The story sparked a national conversation about the ethics of wartime decisions, the treatment of refugees, and the responsibility governments have to preserve identity and memory even in crisis. Historians debated whether Operation Cradle had been a tragic mistake or a calculated cover-up. Ethicists argued about the balance between immediate humanitarian action and long-term justice. But for the families involved, the debate was academic. What mattered was the truth, and the truth was that 50 children had been taken from their pasts, given new identities, and hidden away for 80 years to protect a program that was equal parts compassion and cowardice. The photograph that had been forbidden was now a symbol of the stories that must never be buried again. 3 months after the story broke, Rebecca organized a gathering in Washington, D.C. She invited every living descendant of the children in the photograph, as well as Holocaust survivors and their families who had been searching for lost relatives. The event was held at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, in a quiet hall overlooking the National Mall. Photographs, documents, and personal stories lined the walls. Ruth stood in front of the original photograph, now displayed in a place of honor. Beside her were 6 other survivors, all in their 80s, all seeing the image for the first time in decades. One woman, Anna, pointed to a boy in the back row. "That was my brother," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought he died in the camp. I had no idea he came to America." Rebecca stepped forward gently. "He lived in Chicago. He became a teacher. He had 3 children, and he never stopped wondering if anyone from his family had survived." Anna sobbed. "He was alive. All this time, he was alive." Another woman approached, holding a folder of documents. "I think I'm related to one of these children," she said. "My grandmother spent her entire life searching for her daughter. Is there any way to know?" Rebecca took the folder. "We'll find out." The room filled with voices, stories, tears, and tentative hope. Families separated for 80 years were beginning to piece together the fragments of their histories. Ruth stood quietly, watching. She thought of her mother, Leah, and wondered if she would have been proud of the woman her daughter had become. She would never have the answers to all her questions, but she had the truth, and that was something. In the months that followed, the photograph became a catalyst for change. The U.S. government formally acknowledged Operation Cradle and issued an apology to the families affected. Archives were opened, records were digitized, and a task force was established to help descendants trace their roots. Ruth worked with Rebecca to create a foundation dedicated to reuniting separated families and preserving the identities of displaced children. "No child should ever have to lose their name," Ruth said at the foundation's launch. "No family should ever have to search without answers." David continued his work at the National Archives, but with a new sense of purpose. He started a project to identify other classified materials that might contain hidden stories of injustice, loss, or forgotten lives. Sarah published a book about Operation Cradle, detailing not only the program itself, but the broader implications of wartime decisions made in secrecy and the long shadow they cast over generations. The photograph itself remained on display at the Holocaust Museum, accompanied by the stories of all 50 children. Some had lived long, happy lives. Some had struggled with trauma and displacement. Some had never known the truth, but now their stories were told. On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau, Ruth stood before the photograph once more. She was surrounded by descendants, historians, and survivors, all gathered to honor the children who had been saved, but also lost. She placed a hand on the glass. "We were just children," she said softly. "We didn't understand what was happening, but we deserved to be remembered. We deserved to know who we were." The photograph, once forbidden, now stood as a testament to the power of truth, and the disturbing reason it had been hidden for 80 years. The fear, the shame, the well-meaning arrogance of those who believed they knew best would never be forgotten.